All right, now with the fun stuff out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our session today, ASCE Texas Section Vice President for Technical Affairs, Ron Reichert.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for joining today, day after a long weekend. We appreciate those that give up an hour of their time to sit in on these webinars. That is part of our goal and part of our obligation for Texas Section membership is to provide continuing education opportunities, both in person or via webinar like this for those that maybe cannot make it to a branch meeting. So thank you all. Please spread the word that these do occur twice monthly, and we have a variety of interesting topics. This will be the last meeting I will be hosting as VP Technical, and Mark Boyd will be taking over. So I'm not anywhere interesting today. I'm in a parking lot in Shenandoah, Texas. So we've had some crazy places where I've been hosting these from, but not today. So again, thanks everyone for attending. Please consider joining ASCE if you're not currently a member. And with that, I'm going to throw the show over to incoming VP Technical, Mark Boyd, who will be carrying you not only through the rest of this session today, but for the next year. Take it away, Mark.
All right. Thank you, Ron. And we all appreciate all the work you've done this year on these programs. Very much appreciated. Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Boyd, as Ron said. Currently, I'm the VP Tech Elect of the section. I'm Principal Engineer, Managing Engineering Partner of LCA Environmental. I joined a few years ago after its founding. And I have 35 years of civil and environmental engineering pollution assessment, cleanup, and prevention experience. And I've served on the adjunct faculty of the SMU Bobby B. Lyle School of Engineering for about 20 years. Teaching graduate level specialty courses in groundwater pollution transport, FATE transport, and wastewater treatment processes. As far as my role at Texas ASCE, in addition to my current position, providing leadership for these webinars and on this committee, Beyond Storms, I have worn many hats at the Dallas branch as an officer and at section in various roles. My most recent role was as the chair of our 55-member committee developing Texas ASCE's 2021 infrastructure report card. My colleagues on the committee, Shay Rolson and Julie Hunt, will introduce themselves later on, but I just wanted to say that it's been my privilege to be on board this committee, taking on a small role, helping to develop an objective vision beyond the winter storms of 2021. We're very proud of our report, available on the section website, as it's received national acclaim from Forbes magazine, as well as positive response at the local legislative, public, and engineering community for its breadth, depth, and objectivity. This all-volunteer committee has gone to great lengths to avoid playing the blame game, with an earnest effort to present a fact-based, informative product designed to point toward real solutions to the present dangerous physical and market-based weaknesses of the Texas grid. I want to say one special shout out, appreciation to Dennis Qualls of the city of Dallas, who headed up the weather subcommittee. His contributions obtaining and crunching through NOAA weather data was crucial to the analyses and graphics presented in our report and our presentation today. Next slide, please. Thank you. I hope you find what you hear today to be informative and insightful. Our purpose is to broaden everyone's understanding into the complexities involved in producing and supporting good policy to address the issues we're all aware of. After today's presentation, there are 2 more webinars coming up in October and December. The dates are on screen. The last 2 webinars will drill more deeply into the challenges and systemic problems and solutions related to telecommunications and transportation and network interdependency and conclusions of our report. If you like what you see in this webinar, I also invite you to come to Frisco next week for CCON 2022, where Jeff Roberts, Oliver Smith, and myself will present the highlights during the lunch keynote on Friday the 16th. I am one of your moderators today, while also presenting the initial portions of today's presentation as a member of the Weather Subcommittee. So I'll just forge on ahead. Next slide. These are a few important takeaways I'll provide to you up front to keep in mind as you're listening to our presentation today. The common theme throughout our committee discussions and these webinars is that the issues are interconnected and complex, and the fixes do not lend themselves to unilateral matching of one problem to one solution at a time, as we tend to do in policymaking. A holistic engineered approach is really required. As you'll see on the upcoming slide, it's not just about the weather. The grid and its associated system processes are vulnerable even under nominally serious weather conditions. The weather is only part of the story. Cascading failures were experienced in 2021, which necessitates a hard look at private and public plumbing water conveyance systems and processes. Increasing available treatment capacity all year round and hardening key infrastructure against power loss are two of the committee's key recommendations. Julie will go over the 11 recommendations set forth by the committee toward the end of today's presentation. The committee's position is that weather is part of the story, as I said, but not at all the most important part. The grid is vulnerable to stresses from weather and climate conditions well within the extremes experienced in February 2021, such as the infamous event of February 2011, which is not nearly as severe. I'll speak more about that shortly, but first let's talk about what happened that week. Next slide. So Texas became a purple state that week, apparently. It's not political, it just did. We chose this color. Extreme conditions, absolutely yes. These two graphics tell the story by the numbers in a sense. By and large, the entire state was blanketed in a minimum and maximum daily temperature, 20 to 25 degrees below normal mean temperatures. The comparative normal temps we used were based on recent averages, 91 to 2020. But what really happened? The weather system event of February 21 was severe. It was the first time in history that all 254 counties were placed on winter storm warning. Fortunately, the physically damaging ice storms during winter storms Uri and Viola were localized in impact and wind was relatively moderate. Temperatures were not. Some NOAA experts have indicated that the storms were a 1 in 100 year or 130 year system event. The severity of winter storms' impact infrastructure has four primary dimensions. We considered the number of days when temps were below 32 degrees for an entire 24-hour period. That is 32 degrees was the max. The number of days on both sides of Tmax when min temperatures were at least 1 hour. For at least 1 hour during the 24-hour period was below 32. In other words, the thermometer dipped below freezing. And precipitation, especially freezing precipitation, can lead to physical damage. We considered that, and wind damage impacts from wind chill, accelerating cooling, or physical damage, especially when combined with the freezing. So taking this into the consideration and the blanketing nature of this storm, the committee looked more closely at similar events in the past. So here's kind of a historical perspective on this. With Dennis Qualls doing much of the heavy lifting on the concept, this graphic was put together to display 2021 winter storm in historical perspective. So I myself looked at hundreds of weather station data spreadsheets, and I was looking for stations exemplary of major population centers throughout the state. So no doubt a researcher could do a deep dive and find some regional data that does not reflect these exact characteristics. The colors code scheme is explained on the graph, but basically we were trying to depict which historic storms might compare to the severity and danger to the public of the 2021 storms. We identified 6 storms which had the statewide impact similar to the 2021 storms. The most dangerous event in the 80-plus year record happened in 1940, when the population was substantially less, at 6.4 million in Texas compared to today's 30 million. Per capita demands on the grid was much lower back then. Home heating was not much of an issue, not as much of an issue with wood burning stoves, and much lower. There was a much more lower percentage of folks with electrical service without electrical service and indoor plumbing. The frequency of these events can be debated, but generally speaking, something similar seems to occur in Texas every maybe 10 to 15 years on average. Take note of the two storms I've circled. The red circle is the February 21 storm we know and love. Well, not so much love, right? Well, within the danger zone at 7 consecutive days of maximum temps below freezing and 12 consecutive days of minimum temperatures, which reached the freezing point. So it was cold. The other storms have circled. The other storm I circled is the February 2011 storm, which itself caused issues and unheeded calls for winterization systems, among other things. The troubling thing is the February 2011 storm was really relatively mild, with only 3 to 4 consecutive days of maximum min temps below freezing. Of course, there were wind and precipitation factors that maybe weren't exactly the same as other storms. So I'm not trying to diminish the damage and suffering that the 2011 storm caused. It's simply that it should not be an event which should have stressed a modern and reliable electric grid system the way it in fact did. So we were looking at all this stuff early on, and this position, the position that this committee took very early in the process, is that too much focus on the storm detracts from the more critical issue. Major reliability failures were exposed by Uri and Viola, but these failures and weaknesses extend well beyond extreme winter storm events and are clearly evident even in the cautionary warnings we hear over summer temperature extremes. So Texas has a growing population. We're probably tired of hearing, right? And it's coupled with a substantial and growing electric system reliability and interdependence problem. The balance of this webinar today focuses on these more critical issues as they impact the state's water resources. So with that, that's all we have to say about the weather today. With that, I'll turn this over to Julie Hunt and Shay Rolson to continue today's presentation. Thanks so much for attending, and please post your questions and comments on chat so we may address them at the end of the presentation. Julie, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark. My name is Julie Hunt. Shay Rolson and I are co-chairs of the Water Resources Subcommittee of the ASCE Beyond the Storms Committee. I'm a civil engineer with over 25 years of experience in the water industry. My roles have ranged from operations to executive leadership positions and now consulting. Shay is also a civil engineer with more than 25 years of experience in the planning, design, and construction of water, wastewater, and reclaimed water infrastructure for municipal water utilities across Texas. So how did winter storms Uri and Viola impact water resources in Texas? And what can we learn from it? That is the question our subcommittee set out to answer. As background, we define water resources as water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure that serve the public. In 2019, the state of Texas had 7,056 water systems serving over 29 million people. Of these systems, most are groundwater, which means they take their water from underground aquifers, and about 20% of the systems are surface water, which means they take water from rivers and lakes. Water utilities deliver potable water to customers through a system of transmission and distribution pipelines and maintain minimum water pressures using pump stations and elevated storage tanks. The state of Texas has nearly 4,000 wastewater outfalls, which are points where treated effluent from wastewater treatment plants is discharged to creeks and rivers. To convey wastewater from homes and businesses to treatment plants, utilities own and maintain a system of gravity sewer pipelines, lift stations, and force mains. Stormwater infrastructure is the infrastructure that conveys rainwater that falls on the ground and makes its way to waterways, streams, lakes, and the Gulf via overland flow, and sometimes via a complex system of various storm drain infrastructure, such as inlets, pipes, tunnels, detention, and retention ponds. The effects of the 2021 winter storm were primarily felt in the water system. so we will focus on drinking water today. Approximately 95% of water systems in Texas serve 10,000 people or less, representing 25,000% of the population of Texas. Conversely, the large and very large systems in Texas serve approximately 75% of the population. Water resources cannot be looked at in a vacuum. Other infrastructure sectors influence and impact water resources and vice versa. The other infrastructure sectors include, but are not limited to, energy, transportation, chemicals, and communications. There's growing interdependence between all of these sectors, and we'll see today how important it is to take proactive steps to reduce the risk this poses. Water utilities do prepare for and anticipate emergencies. There are several guidance references for water utilities to use in this preparation. In accordance with TCEQ subchapter D, Rules and Regulations for Public Water Systems, water systems are required to be designed to maintain a minimum pressure of 35 psi at all points within the distribution network at flow rates of at least 1.5 gallons per minute per connection. When the system is intended to provide firefighting capability, it must also be designed to maintain a minimum pressure of 20 psi under combined fire and drinking water flow conditions. The America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018, AWIA, requires systems that serve more than 3,300 people, which is about 14% of water utilities serving 89% of the population of Texas, to complete a risk and resilience assessment, also called an RRA, develop an emergency response plan, these are called ERP, and certify to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency that they have done so. These plans must be updated and recertified every 5 years. The American Water Works Association policy statement on electric power reliability for public water supply and wastewater utilities states that every water and wastewater utility should set uninterrupted service as a high priority operating goal. In order to maintain the required levels of service, water, wastewater, and stormwater utilities engage in some level of all hazards risk assessment and planning, an approach that includes the full spectrum of occurrences that could happen without focusing on specific risks, such as malicious acts or natural disasters. The emphasis is on developing multi-hazard response capacities that address the most common risks for the utility, but also provide capacity to respond to less likely risks. The AWWA published Manual M19, Emergency Planning for Water Utilities in 2018, which provides guidelines and procedures that can be used by water utilities in preparation for emergencies and disasters. In this document are summaries of potential hazards, as well as identification of common water system components and how each may be vulnerable. A range of mitigation actions that can be taken to decrease the vulnerability of components is discussed, along with consideration of costs and benefits of such actions. Emergency preparedness plans are presented along with discussions on training, techniques, and regulatory requirements. Importantly, the concepts of emergency response, recovery, and training are presented in the specific context of water utility operations. This offers informative and applicable examples of the considerations water utilities must implement in order to effectively manage emergency situations. 7 general steps, which are shown on this slide, are recommended. The AWWA Manual M19 provides an excellent framework from which to begin considering emergency events experienced in the state of Texas. So with this background on utility preparations for emergencies, we now look at the events of February 13th through the 17th of 2021. The storm included major ice and snow for much of the United States. There were various winter weather alerts, and the storm caused blackouts for millions of people, including significant power issues in Texas. Leading up to the week of the storm, water utilities were aware of the likelihood the temperatures would drop below freezing for a period of days. Preparations were made to protect infrastructure from the freezing temperatures. Utilities issued alerts to customers to remember to drip their faucets and open their under-sink cabinet doors in an attempt to keep their premise plumbing from freezing. As the weather intensified, water utilities began to experience impacts related to issues in other sectors. The water and energy sectors are inexplicably linked. In fact, there's even a term for it, the water energy nexus. This refers to the relationship between how much energy is needed to collect, clean, move, store, and dispose of water, as well as how much water is used to generate and transmit power. The U.S. Department of Energy wrote in 2014 that present-day water and energy systems are interdependent. Water is used in all phases of energy production and electricity generation. Energy is required to extract, convey, and deliver water of appropriate quality for diverse human uses, and then again to treat wastewaters prior to their return to the environment. Despite this interdependence between the sectors, water and energy systems have been developed and managed independently. Most water utilities have established points of contact within their electric delivery provider to identify critical facilities within the water utility. Despite these efforts to stay connected, as power outages began rolling across Texas in February of 2021, many water utilities experienced power outages at critical facilities. Another sector that is interconnected with water is the transportation sector. Water utilities use the roadway network every day to access facilities, haul sludge generated by the wastewater treatment process, and deliver chemicals and equipment needed to keep their facilities operating. Many utilities have facilities that are difficult to access due to terrain and/or remote locations. During the winter storm, road conditions made these facilities inaccessible. Treatment processes are dependent on the delivery of chemicals from third-party vendors, and many of their production facilities were affected by power disruptions, and they had grounded their trucks due to road conditions. Water utilities also use wired and wireless communications to collect and transmit system and operations data to a central control center. Fiber optic and radio system failures during the storms impacted some systems' abilities to monitor system operations. As the temperatures dropped and water demands increased due to the customer's use for dripping their faucets, along with private premise plumbing breaks and main breaks, many water utilities had to treat and distribute water to meet demands that abnormally reached or exceeded peak summer day levels. Many water utilities had to bring additional water treatment capacity online. At the same time, power outages affected treatment and pumping capacities, and main breaks drained storage tanks faster than utilities could fill them. In this graphic of an example utility, you can see the timeline of events played out. Water demand is shown in gray, production is shown in blue, and system storage is shown in red. For the first 4 days of the freeze, water production is able to keep pace with the demand. But as freezing weather and power outages linger, demand begins to outpace production and storage drops to essentially zero. At that point, water pressures dropped below 20 psi and systems were forced to issue boil water notices. In total, over 2,300 public water systems issued boil water notices, affecting a population of nearly 18 million people. The boil water notices issued were a direct result of the storm relating to power loss, damaged equipment, loss of pressure, and dangerous road conditions. The first boil water notice issued in the state was on February 16, 2021, and the last boil water notice lifted was on March 13, 2021. Compounding the problem was the lack of power to boil water, leading to shortages of bottled water in grocery stores. I will now turn the presentation over to Shay to discuss the results of a utility survey that was conducted by the committee.
Thank you. So to gain greater insights into the specific challenges faced during the winter storm, a high-level informal survey of Texas water utilities was performed by the Water Resources Subcommittee. Participation in this survey was entirely voluntary, and the information obtained from those that participated offers useful elements for consideration. Of the 17 respondents, which is about a 24% response rate, all of them served system populations greater than 3,300 people, with 9 respondents serving populations greater than 100,000 people. All but 2 provide water service, 11 provide wastewater, and 6 provide stormwater. We asked each utility to provide information on these 7 areas, essentially spanning the past, present, and future of risk resilience, planning, and emergency response. We asked what types of proactive risk mitigation they had done over the years and what their typical winter weather preparations were. Specific to the 2021 winter storm, we asked what they did immediately before the storm, what their experiences were during the storm, and what was required for system and community recovery. Finally, we asked about short and long-term planning underway. Most respondents found the most significant problems were in their water systems, as Julie said earlier, so that's where we'll focus the rest of our time today. Utilities told us that preparation does not begin days or weeks before an event, but over years. Utilities talked about having developed and maintained their risk and resilience assessments and emergency response plans for OWEA. Many utilities had installed backup generation and dual power feeds to their critical facilities. Aggressive leak detection and main replacement programs were credited with reducing main breaks during the storms. For example, Dallas Water Utilities instituted their leak detection and rehabilitation program 20 years prior to the winter storm. Utilities have been systematically removing cast iron pipes from their systems, resulting in fewer water main breaks during cold weather. Utilities with automated metering infrastructure indicated that AMI proved to be very valuable in locating premise leaks. The rapid identification of these leaks allowed water utilities to quickly address private side water loss and communicate with customers. Utilities told us that they typically implement winterization efforts seasonally, which helped to limit the freezing of critical infrastructure at pump stations and treatment plants and equip operators for safely working in freezing conditions, including sheltering in place if needed. As Winter Storm Uri approached, utilities confirmed their earlier winterization efforts, implemented additional freeze protection, and tested backup protocols. They topped off storage in the distribution system and chemicals, fuel, and supplies at treatment plants and pump stations. They sanded roads and pumped down sludge holding tanks. Utilities also increased communications with their staff, revised schedules to accommodate round-the-clock activities, and assigned staff to areas where manual operation may be needed. Utilities issued public communications advising their customers on how to keep premise plumbing from freezing, including dripping faucets and opening cabinet doors to allow warmer air to surround under cabinet piping. During the storm, utilities were extremely busy with additional tasks that resulted from the cascading events of prolonged freezing and power outages. In the treatment plants, they brought on additional treatment capacity while knocking down pipe and equipment problems caused by the extended freeze. Regulatory staff stepped up monitoring, and when pressures dropped below 20 psi, coordinated the significant effort required to issue boil water notices, and then immediately began planning the complex process of lifting the notices. In the collection and distribution systems, crews transported portable generators as power outages rolled across their service areas. They responded to leaks and sanitary sewer overflows and manually operated equipment and valves and observed system performance. Utility staff were busy with securing lodging, food, supplies, and transportation for field and emergency management staff. Customer support staff responded to record-breaking numbers of calls and coordinated the delivery of bottled water. Communications teams stood up leak maps in real time, attempted to keep news outlets informed, and posted on social media around the clock. And let's not forget that all of this took place in the middle of a global pandemic. After the storm, utilities remained busy with repairing main breaks and assisting customers with isolating private side plumbing leaks. Field crews remained on emergency 12-hour rotations for several more days. As the water quality testing was underway in the distribution system to support lifting the boil water notice, utilities continued to distribute bottled water. Some multifamily residential suffered such catastrophic premise plumbing failures the utilities provided taps on nearby fire hydrants for residents to fill buckets. Financial staff immediately began working on bill relief, and management staff rolled right into after-action assessments. Our evaluation of the results of the survey, as well as our own experiences during the storm, supported the finding that it was a cascade of failures that led to widespread water outages and boil water notices across the state. Excessive demands coupled with inadequate treatment and conveyance capacity crippled water systems' ability to maintain adequate water pressure and service to customers. On the demand side, dripping faucets and pipeline failures caused by the winter storm caused unprecedented demand in excess of summertime peaks. On the supply side, many utilities had treatment capacity out of service for planned maintenance or construction, a common practice in Texas's usually mild winters. Utilities worked to bring that capacity online, but freezing weather, impassable roads, and power outages more than outweighed those efforts. Let's walk through a brief graphic to illustrate this cascade of events. We'll look at what was happening in the water treatment plant, shown in the blue section, what was happening in the distribution system, including pipelines and pump stations, in the green section, and what was happening in customers' homes and businesses, shown in the orange section. Note that customers were facing many other challenges during the winter storm, but for the purposes of this discussion, we're focused on what was happening in private plumbing. Some utilities had existing conditions that made them vulnerable to the events of Winter Storms Uri and Viola, such as treatment equipment out of service for winter maintenance or construction, old cast iron pipe in the distribution system, and lack of power generation or inadequate redundancy at pump stations. As the freezing weather dragged on over several days, utilities began to experience equipment and generator failures in plants and pump stations. Pipe insulation and heat trace failures also occurred. No relief from freezing temperatures, combined with additional precipitation from Winter Storm Viola, created treacherous road conditions that made it difficult to haul off treatment plant sludge, receive chemical deliveries, and deliver fuel and portable generators to pump stations. As widespread power failures rolled across utility service areas, plant and pump station operation were impacted. Customers were unable to access public communication, and the extended period of time without heat caused piping inside homes to begin to freeze. As these conditions persisted and overlapped, utilities began to see rising equipment and piping failures. Utility crews were consumed with repairing equipment failures in treatment plants and pipe breaks in the distribution system. They continued to haul portable generators and refuel permanent generators to keep pump stations operational. Customers' pipes froze and broke. With all of this happening all at once, systems experienced unprecedented demands that exceeded a normal peak summer day, coupled with inadequate treatment and conveyance capacity to meet those mounting demands. Utilities were unable to maintain storage in their systems, pressures fell below 20 psi, and boil water notices were required. Many customers had no water at all. Only when power was restored, temperatures rose and stayed above freezing, and road conditions improved, were utilities able to restore system operation, replenish storage, and lift boil water notices. Even before utilities had recovered from winter storms Uri and Viola, the Texas legislature began crafting Senate Bill 3. This bill provides for the preparation for, prevention of, and response to extreme weather emergencies and extended power outages. The new law creates Section 13.1394 of the Texas Water Code, which expands the definition of an affected utility to include every water utility in Texas. By November 1st, 2021, water utilities were required to submit information to the Public Utility Commission of Texas, identifying each electric utility that provides service to the utility, including transmission and distribution, as well as retail providers. Water utilities were also required to provide those electricity providers with a list of their critical infrastructure. Emergency preparedness plans were due to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality by March 1st of 2022. These plans may utilize any combination of 14 available options to demonstrate that the system can maintain water pressures above 20 psi for power outages lasting 24 hours or more. The options can be broadly categorized as power resiliency, distribution system resiliency, and shared resources with other utilities. At this time, all utilities should have completed these plans and be looking forward to winter 2023 with confidence that they are as prepared as they can be. Julie will wrap up our findings with the subcommittee's list of recommendations.
All right, based on all this analysis, the Water Resources Subcommittee compiled 11 recommended actions. So first of all, consider revising schedules for winter maintenance and construction to increase the amount of treatment capacity available during winter months. Consider increasing the number of backup generators, including portable backup generators on trailers and portable diesel pumps. Consider implementing backup power for SCADA communications. Consider increasing bulk chemical storage. Educate the public on the need for 72 hours of supplies for emergencies. Educate customers on locating and operating their premise water shutoff valves. Replace cast iron pipes with a history of poor performance. Invest in all-weather vehicles and stage those vehicles for staff access prior to the arrival of winter weather. Top off water supply storage prior to a winter storm event. Conduct winter weather preparation at facilities such as pipe insulation, draining non-critical piping, storing and distributing winter weather gear, such as strap-on boot spikes, making sure there's bedding available for staff that need to stay overnight, food, such as MREs, ensure manual access to critical facilities, such as walk-through gates. Invest in automated metering infrastructure implementation. So we want to thank you for joining us in this third part of the webinar series. Hopefully you have learned something new and it has sparked some considerations for you. We would now like to turn it over to Mark Boyd for questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Julie and Shay. So this is a first for this series of webinars. I see no questions so far. Anybody want to jump in with a question? We have 70 folks in attendance, and we really, really appreciate your attending. And please type in your questions into the Q&A. There, I got something. All right, well, Otis Foster, well, thank you, Otis. Excellent presentation. You have no question, we covered it all. Thanks so much, Otis. From Wade Smith, same thing, nicely done. All right, here's a question from Helena Tiedman. Are the full survey results available online? Would love to explore that further. Julie or Shay, would you take that?
I think the survey results are summarized in our report. I don't think we've published the actual survey results, but I know Helena and I'd be happy to talk to you about them.
Yeah, and the report really does include the charts and graphs of the summary of the responses, and then in a tabular form lists a lot of the observations that Shay talked through during the presentation. So the report is available online and has most of the information, if not all.
All right, we have a combination question from Jean Audibert. I heard, so I saw on the screen also, we used the word consider in terms of implementing steps. I heard only consider. And so the follow-up is not shall implement. You want to, either one of you
Yeah.
want to take that one?
I'd love to take that one. You know, I think every water utility has different vulnerabilities. When you look at the plan that's required by TCEQ, there are 14 options you can use, and you can use any combination of those options to demonstrate that you can meet the requirement. And so I think it's really specific to individual utilities on the things that they need to do and where they need to invest their funding in order to best bolster their areas of vulnerability. You know, I think there's a heavy emphasis on more generators, but when you look at those 14 options, you know, that's only a part of the story. There are lots of other ways that you can bolster your vulnerabilities through additional storage or if you're a small system, interconnecting with a large system. So you want to really take a thoughtful approach. And that's why we didn't want to dictate thou shalt do any specific thing.
Mhm. Well, I think that's a good answer, Shay. And I think that words matter when we're preparing these things as a committee. And we have to be careful about the words we use. And something that fits one area or one utility won't necessarily fit another. So there's some amount of flexibility there has to be in the way that we present things. So from Jody, I have a question. How much improvement must occur to reach an acceptable level of service, and how long might this take?
Well, I think that really varies from utility to utility again. And I think it's important to recognize that there are some actions we can take right away, like communications with stakeholders. You know, we can help our customers be better prepared for the next emergency. You know, having on-call contractors ready to go when storm events are coming, some of those things that we can do very quickly. Other things like CIP investment in additional elevated storage tanks, you know, that could take 5 to 10 years to implement once you get it programmed into your CIP. So I think a lot of utilities are trying to shore up what they can in the short term, as well as make investments in the long term. And you want to make sure those investments aren't only addressing winter weather. They need to be addressing, you know, a variety of vulnerabilities, just like you talked about, Mark, with and Julie, with the kind of all hazards approach to planning.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's a great answer, Shay. I got another comment here. I think you should do water shut off at residences a high priority. This is from Gail Baxter. Too many photos of people watching water pour through their ceilings, resulting in pressure loss.
Yeah, this was a really, this was huge in terms of how people did not know how to cut off their own water. And so we had to really mobilize crews to work around the clock so that we could respond to those calls as fast as possible. So that educational component is a high priority and should be a high priority for water utilities, so that along with making sure that customers have emergency supplies, they should also have the ability to shut off their water in the event that they do have a premise plumbing break.
All right, thank you. I got another question. Audis Foster, can you speak a bit about the costs likely associated with the recommendations, especially the requirements for on-site generators?
They're high.
Yeah, millions in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, I know there are some utilities that are spending tens of millions of dollars on additional generators, and there are others that are choosing to put that money toward more elevated storage in the distribution system. But regardless, utilities are making large investments. The magnitude really depends. You know, a smaller city is going to have a smaller CIP, and
Mhm.
So it really varies, but I would say that most utilities are really looking at resilience as in part of their CIP planning. If they
All right. And I would add that as far as the cost, this is in keeping with the theme of all the webinars in our committee, is that all these things are focused on reliability, and to us, reliability involves saving lives, keeping people from being harmed, and that is what we're focused on. So in the end, we have to factor in the costs of the social costs of catastrophes into our idea of what is very expensive and what is very costly. Let's see, this is, I'm not sure is a comment or a question, maybe a follow-up from a previous one, but it says that is education about water shutoff. And I mean, educate me, does that mean that a bunch of folks out there don't know where their shutoff valve is at their house? Is that what it is?
Yeah, so that was our experience. At the time, I was working with the city of McKinney, and there were so many calls coming in from customers needing to have their private side, you know, their personal water shut off, and they didn't know how to do it or where their shutoff valve was. So we were just constantly dispatching crews around the clock, keeping busy with helping people do that. So that is a valve that the property owner can operate themselves. They just need to know where it is.
Yeah, I work for Austin Water, and we put a video on our website that shows people how to operate their water shutoff valve. And we actually handed out free water meter keys, so you could do it yourself. That's not a thing that utilities have really done in the past. Typically, it's been the water utility that operates that valve. But we had the same experience Julie is talking about. So many people and who did not know how to turn their water off, or people who left town because of the cold weather. And then came back to broken pipes, or people who hadn't been able to get into their business because of impassable roads and got there when the roads finally cleared and found water gushing everywhere. I mean, it was very widespread.
The next question is, and I can address this one. Can you share a link for the online report? There are two reports. One is an executive summary report, and the other is the full report. Mike can provide the actual link. I can tell you that it's on the texasasce.org website under programs Beyond Storm. So if you Google Texas ASCE programs Beyond Storm, it should take you to a link to download the executive summary and the full report. There's no fuss, no muss on this. They're available on PDF. You don't have to log in or register or even be a member to get access of the report. Mike can take care of sending out the link, I think, to the attendees. Let's see, from Travis Atanasio, our president-elect of the ASCE Texas section, did the interdependence of water systems, i.e. big cities supplying small cities, come into play on whether the supplier ran out of water?
I don't have any personal knowledge or information from the survey to be able to answer that.
I think a lot of the failures were so catastrophic that you know, if a utility was able to not suffer those catastrophic failures, then they could support another utility or be supported by another utility. But you know, a lot of us all went down together.
From Curtis Beidel, one of our past presidents, excellent presentation. Have we estimated the cost of any of the 14 recommendations?
No, that was not included in the work of this committee. So the answer is no.
Would it be fair to say it's because of the nature of the individual utilities? It's a whole nother committee just to do that, and a whole nother committee cycle to research that by region and utility.
Yeah, I think it would involve another survey and quite extensively about, what they actually had in their recommendations in the report that they submitted to TCEQ. And then I know that in some cases, the utilities prepared that and had cost estimates, and now those actual bids are coming in quite a bit higher than what they actually estimated as well. So yeah, it could be the work of another committee for sure.
Okay. We still have time here for questions, because the team here stayed on time budget. I'm speaking to myself more than anybody. So is there any procedure in place to test the preparedness of the service before the emergency, like satellite phones, personal water filters, etc.?
I think most utilities have, and did before this event, but have beefed them up, standard operating procedures for preparing for cold weather. I know that Austin Water has an SOP for cold weather, and now we have another SOP for extremely cold weather. So I think those, the utilities are following their own procedures to make sure they're prepared. We don't really have any way to gauge how prepared our customers are, other than to really broadcast messaging as much as possible to try to encourage people to have 72 hours of supplies on hand.
The other thing we can do are emergency exercises. So, we can go and do tabletop exercises where you start to practice the use of those procedures and that equipment, and then move on into functional exercises where you are actually acting like that event is occurring. You're making the actual phone calls, you're using the actual equipment. So those are two very good ways that utilities could practice.
That's a great one, Julie.
Okay. Here's a question from Esmeralda Gonzalez. How can we find information on our particular region of how prepared our community is?
I would reach out to your local water utility and ask them what they're doing for winter 2023.
And they also had to submit written documentation, risk and resilience plans. They had to submit some documentation to TCEQ regarding how they were going to be prepared to maintain the 20 PSI in their system. So those plans should be available, and they should be able to at least give you some idea of that they submitted it, and how long it's going to take them to implement it.
Right. This from Rob. Are there requirements to ensure contingency plans are being followed and can be implemented by municipal and private utilities? Are they prepared?
So Shay talked about Senate Bill 3, and a lot of what was in that required utilities to really look at their systems and understand. Utilities had to identify critical infrastructure and submit that to the Public Utility Commission, and then also having to prepare the plans that we talked about that were submitted to TCEQ. Those are what I would consider your contingency plans, what you're planning to do if something goes wrong.
Okay. So from Jody, it says, thanks, good answer. I'm not sure which answer Jody's talking about, but we appreciate the compliment. And we're engineers, and we answer the question as opposed to politicians that talk around it, or reporters or pundits. It drives me. One of the pet peeves I have on watching interviews on TV is they never answer the actual question. They just make some statement about something they want to announce. That's not what we do. and we appreciate the compliment. A message here, or a question here: for small utilities, the initial cost and maintenance of generators at pump stations may not be affordable. Would using generator docks and rental generators be more practical?
Yeah, I think every utility has to look at what's the mix that makes sense for them of rental versus portable versus permanent generators. How do you keep them fueled? Where are you going to get them? You know, one of the issues with mutual aid agreements during these winter storms was that everyone was suffering at the same time. And so it made it difficult for utilities to help each other. So, and I think that it would have been difficult to get rental equipment delivered during that time. So, you know, I hate to keep saying it depends on the situation a given utility is in, but it depends on the situation a given utility is in. I think the, you know, the plans that Julie was talking about, the real key there is to take a hard look at your own utility and be thoughtful about how you can best address your risk. You know, don't just turn to generators, you know, look at storage in your system, look at, you know, what are your, how can you sort of most effectively leverage the funding you have to reduce your risk.
Just to follow up on a previous question about the link to the report, Mike has submitted a link through chat where you can find our executive summary and full report. From Esmeralda again, is there a place we can get informed about infrastructure projects underway in our area?
Yeah, I would suggest checking out your municipality website, and a lot of cities have started putting their infrastructure project schedules out on the website, but if they haven't, then certainly give them a call. Engineering or public works departments are a great way to start and find out what their schedule of infrastructure projects is and what the projects are.
Okay. Here, this is from Travis real quick. I guess it's a follow-up to Travis's previous question. He's trying to drill into this. Have you all heard anything about any big cities shutting out small cities to maintain their own supply? Travis, is there something you can tell us that we don't know?
Yeah, so in the course of our survey and in the experience of the committee members, and we had several large utilities represented, we did not get that in our feedback that there was any attempt to shut out any small cities. And in fact, in my experience with McKinney, we actually were receiving water from North Texas Municipal Water District, and they were doing everything they could to keep everybody in water and trying to balance it so that no one city suffered unnecessarily. So if they were balancing the supply to all of their customer cities so that everybody was receiving some water.
All right, thank you. So now we got the opposite problem. We got a bunch of questions, which we really appreciate. I've got 8 on the list. We could go a couple of minutes over, but keep your answers short. I'll just have to cut it off here soon. The recommended actions will require funding. Should another recommended action include public information education campaign for the water utility to explain the needs for these additional funds, which likely will require higher water rates, which are not popular?
Actually, one of our recommendations as it relates to AMI, automated metering, is that you use the real-time water use information as a selling point for why your community would want to spend the money to implement AMI. So we touch on it a little bit in our recommendations, but certainly informing the public is a regular part of what water utilities need to be doing. So agree with the recommendation from the audience member.
City of Houston, from Rob, City of Houston could not get the emergency generators to start during the storm event. No prior drills. I don't know that that's a question, but is that the
So-
case?
So I think that just goes back to the concept of exercising your plan and having those tabletop and functional exercises. But yeah, we didn't receive that information through our survey, but it could happen. If the equipment's not exercised, that very well could happen.
Does public assistance under the Stafford Act, this is from Curtis Beidel, include repair of water systems? If so, is mitigation funding available under a federally declared disaster?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, great question. I don't either.
You stumped us, Curtis.
Yes, Curtis, nice
Yes.
job.
Aren't we supposed to be done already? Isn't it time?
Yeah, we are. We may have to start cutting it off. when we get started. So
Should have cut it off before the hard ones.
yeah, I think so. We have some compliments, some additional compliments in here. Great presentation. We really appreciate all those. And you're right, we should probably cut this off now. I think we will. I've got most of these questions are pretty complex, and we apologize for that. But we're always available to you through our contacts at ASCE to discuss it with you, and you may want to come see us at CCON, and we'll talk to you then as well. Mike, we're out of time on this, so it's 1:03. Why don't you go ahead and take over for the wrap up? And everybody, I couldn't get to all the questions, but appreciate everything. Thanks.
Great questions. Thank you,
for
everyone.
everything. And we appreciate you taking part of your lunch hour to visit with us in this webinar. And Mike, back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks once again to Shay and Julie for taking the time to give us such a wonderful presentation and answer all those questions. As mentioned before, I'll be emailing a certificate of attendance to everyone on the session. That might take a week or two, so please be patient with me on that. If you're interested in presenting a session, please reach out to us at vptech@texasce.org. You can head to our website to find a list of upcoming sessions. The next one is September 20th, about trench and excavation safety. And like Mark said, we're always available for your questions, and this will conclude today's session.